when Karoline Leavitt walked onto the set of Live Tonight with Ethan Carter. The audience buzzed with curiosity. The young conservative rising star, known for her sharp wit and unshakable poise, was about to face one of the most notorious interviewers in liberal media. Ethan Carter, famous for his gotcha questions and viral takedowns, had a reputation for leaving his guests flustered and defeated. But what Ethan didn't know was that Karoline wasn't just another guest. She was a force to be reckoned with. And what happened next wasn't just an interview, it was a masterclass in grace, intelligence, and the power of standing firm in your truth. The studio was alive with energy. The lights blazed down, casting a golden glow over the set. The audience buzzed with anticipation, their murmurs blending with the hum of cameras and the occasional bark of a producer's command. At the center of it all sat Ethan Carter, the liberal TV host known for his sharp tongue and knack for turning interviews into viral takedowns. His tailored suit and polished grin screamed confidence. But there was a glint in his eye, a predator's glint, that hinted at the storm brewing beneath his charm. Ethan adjusted his earpiece, his smirk widening as he glanced at his cue cards. Tonight's guest was Karoline Leavitt, a rising star in conservative politics. Young, articulate, and unapologetically bold, she'd been making waves with her no-nonsense approach to policy and her ability to hold her own in debates. Ethan had done his homework. He knew her positions, her past statements, and the controversies that followed her. He was ready to pounce. The audience erupted into applause as Karoline stepped onto the stage. She moved with quiet confidence, her navy blue dress elegant yet understated. Her smile was warm but measured. She shook Ethan's hand firmly, her grip steady, her gaze unwavering. There was no hint of nerves, no flicker of doubt. She was here to talk, not to be talked down to. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his tone dripping with faux friendliness. "Welcome to the show, Karoline. It's not every day we get someone so young and ambitious in this chair." The audience chuckled, but the edge in his voice was unmistakable. Karoline simply nodded, her expression calm. "Thank you, Ethan. It's great to be here." The tension was subtle but palpable. Ethan's questions would come fast and furious. But Karoline's quiet determination suggested she wasn't just here to answer, she was here to challenge. The audience leaned forward, sensing the clash before it even began. This wasn't going to be just another interview. This was going to be a battle. The interview began with the usual pleasantries. Ethan crossed his legs, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp. "So, Karoline," he started, his tone light, "you've had quite the rise in politics, from grassroots campaigns to national stages. What's that journey been like for you?" Karoline smiled, her voice steady and warm. "It's been incredible, Ethan. I've been fortunate to work with so many passionate people who believe in the power of conservative values. It's not just about policies, it's about fighting for the principles that make this country great." Ethan nodded, his smile never wavering. "And those principles, what would you say defines your approach? You're often described as a new voice in the conservative movement. What does that mean to you?" Karoline leaned forward slightly, her hands resting gently on her lap. "To me, it's about bringing fresh energy and ideas to the table while staying true to the timeless values that have guided us for generations. It's about listening to people, understanding their struggles, and offering real solutions, not just rhetoric." The audience listened intently, their initial curiosity deepening. Karoline's clarity and poise were disarming, her words resonating with a quiet power. But Ethan's smile had a hint of something else, something calculated. He was testing the waters, probing for weaknesses. "That's fascinating," he said, his tone still friendly but with a subtle edge. "But let's be honest, conservative values have been criticized as outdated by some. How do you respond to that?" Karoline didn't miss a beat. "I think it's easy to label something as outdated when you don't understand it. Conservative values are about freedom, responsibility, and opportunity, things that will never go out of style. The real question is, why are we so quick to dismiss ideas that have stood the test of time?" The audience murmured, some nodding in agreement. Ethan's smile tightened just a fraction. He wasn't used to guests pushing back so smoothly. "Fair point," he said, his tone still light but his eyes narrowing slightly. But let's dig a little deeper. The tension was building, the friendly start giving way to something sharper. The audience could feel it, the calm before the storm. Karoline's quiet confidence was a force to be reckoned with. And Ethan's next move would determine just how far he was willing to go. Ethan leaned forward, his smile still intact but his tone shifting ever so slightly. Karoline, let's talk about some of the issues that have defined your career. You've been a vocal advocate for limited government and individual freedoms. But some critics argue that your stance on, say, healthcare, opposing universal healthcare, is out of touch with the needs of everyday Americans. How do you respond to that? The question hung in the air, heavy and loaded. The audience shifted in their seats, sensing the shift in tone. Ethan's phrasing was deliberate, framing Karoline's position as extreme or uncaring. But Karoline didn't flinch. She met his gaze, her expression calm but resolute. I think it's important to clarify what limited government really means. She began, her voice steady. It's not about abandoning people or ignoring their needs. It's about empowering individuals, not bureaucracies. Universal healthcare sounds compassionate, but it often leads to longer wait times, fewer choices, and lower quality care. I believe in solutions that put patients and doctors in charge, not politicians. Ethan raised an eyebrow, his smirk widening. But isn't that just code for leaving people to fend for themselves? What about those who can't afford private insurance? Shouldn't the government step in to help? Karoline's response was measured but firm. The government already steps in. Ethan, programs like Medicaid exist to help those in need. But throwing more money at a broken system isn't the answer. We need to address the root causes, like skyrocketing drug prices and lack of competition, not just slap a band-aid on the problem. Real compassion is about finding solutions that work, not just ones that sound good in a soundbite. The audience murmured, some nodding in agreement, others exchanging glances. Karoline's calm, well-reasoned answer had flipped the narrative, turning Ethan's loaded question into an opportunity to educate. Ethan's smile tightened just a fraction. But he wasn't done yet. The tension in the room was palpable, the friendly start now a distant memory. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him. Let's talk about something you said a few years ago. He began, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. You were quoted as saying, the government has no business dictating what people do with their lives. Yet you've been a strong supporter of pro-life policies, which many argue are about controlling women's bodies. Isn't that a contradiction? The trap was set. Ethan's question was designed to corner Karoline, to paint her as hypocritical or inconsistent. The audience held their breath, waiting to see how she would respond. Karoline paused for a moment, her expression thoughtful but unshaken. That's an interesting way to frame it, she said, her tone calm but with a hint of steel. But let's be clear, supporting the right to life isn't about controlling anyone. It's about protecting the most vulnerable among us, the unborn. My belief in limited government doesn't mean I think there should be no laws or moral standards. It means I believe in personal responsibility and the sanctity of life. Ethan's smirk faltered for a split second, but he pressed on. But doesn't that stance infringe on a woman's right to choose? How do you reconcile that with your supposed belief in individual freedom? Karoline didn't miss a beat. Freedom doesn't mean the absence of responsibility, Ethan. It means the ability to make choices within a framework of respect for others. A society that values freedom must also value life. And let's not forget, many women who are pro-life feel that way because they believe in the dignity of every human being, born and unborn. It's not about control, it's about compassion. The audience erupted into a mix of gasps and applause. Karoline's sharp, witty response had not only dismantled Ethan's trap but also exposed the bias in his framing. Ethan blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. He opened his mouth to respond. But Karoline wasn't finished. And let me ask you this, she added, her tone still calm but with a cutting edge. If we're going to talk about contradictions, why is it that the same people who claim to champion women's rights often silence women who don't agree with them? Shouldn't true feminism include all voices, not just the ones that fit a certain narrative? The room exploded into applause, some audience members even standing to cheer. Ethan's smile was strained now, his confidence visibly shaken. Karoline had turned the tables, and the tension in the room was electric. The interview was no longer just a conversation, it was a showdown. Ethan tried to recover, clearing his throat and forcing a smile. "Well, Karoline, you certainly have a way with words," he said, his tone light but his eyes still sharp. "But let's talk about another issue that's been in the news lately. You've been critical of the mainstream media, calling it biased. Isn't that just a way to dismiss criticism and avoid accountability?" Karoline leaned forward slightly, her gaze steady and her voice calm but firm. "Ethan, I think it's important to clarify what I mean when I talk about media bias. It's not about dismissing criticism, it's about pointing out a pattern. When conservative voices are consistently misrepresented or taken out of context, it's not just unfair, it's dishonest. And it undermines the trust people have in the media." Ethan raised an eyebrow, his smirk returning. "But isn't that just a convenient excuse? If the media is so biased, why do so many people still rely on it for information?" Karoline didn't miss a beat. "Because, for a long time, the media was seen as a neutral source of information. But that trust has been eroding, and for good reason. When headlines twist words, when stories are framed to fit a narrative rather than reflect the truth, it's not journalism, it's activism. And I think people are starting to see that." The audience murmured, some nodding in agreement. Ethan opened his mouth to respond. But Karoline wasn't finished. "Let me give you an example," she said, her tone still calm but with a hint of humor. "If I were to say, I believe in lower taxes, a fair headline might be, Karoline Leavitt advocates for tax cuts. But what we often see is, Karoline Leavitt wants to defund schools and hospitals. Do you see the difference?" The audience chuckled, and even Ethan let out a small, uneasy laugh. Karoline's use of humor and logic had dismantled his argument, leaving him momentarily speechless. She leaned back, her expression calm but confident. "I'm not asking for special treatment, Ethan, I'm asking for fairness. And I think that's something everyone, regardless of their political beliefs, can agree on." The audience erupted into applause, their energy fully behind Karoline now. Ethan shifted in his seat, his smile strained. The tension in the room was electric, and it was clear that Karoline had taken control of the conversation. Ethan straightened his tie, his smile tighter now, his tone sharper. "All right, Karoline, let's talk about something that's been a hot-button issue for a while now, climate change. You've been critical of some of the more aggressive policies proposed to address it. Critics say your stance is irresponsible, even dangerous. How do you respond to that?" The question was designed to provoke, to push Karoline into a defensive position. But she remained calm, her expression thoughtful but unshaken. "Climate change is an important issue, Ethan, and one that deserves serious discussion. But the solutions we propose need to be realistic and effective, not just politically popular." Ethan leaned forward, his tone more aggressive now. "But isn't it true that your party has a history of denying the science behind climate change? How can you claim to take it seriously when your policies don't reflect that?" Karoline's response was measured but firm. "I think it's unfair to paint an entire party with such a broad brush. There are plenty of conservatives who care deeply about the environment. But we also believe in solutions that don't cripple our economy or punish working families. For example, innovation and technology have done more to reduce emissions than heavy-handed regulations ever could." Ethan's frustration was becoming visible. He pressed on, his voice rising slightly. "But isn't that just an excuse to do nothing? The planet is in crisis. And you're talking about innovation? How is that a real solution?" Karoline's tone remained calm, but there was a steely edge to her words now. "Ethan, innovation is a real solution. Look at the progress we've made in renewable energy, in electric vehicles, in carbon capture technology. These are real, tangible advancements that are making a difference. But they don't happen overnight. And they don't happen by bankrupting the very industries that drive our economy." The audience was fully engaged now, leaning forward in their seats. Karoline's calm, fact-based response had diffused Ethan's aggression, and his frustration was palpable. He opened his mouth to respond, but Karoline wasn't finished. "And let's not forget, she added, her tone still calm but cutting. That many of the countries pushing the most aggressive climate policies are also the ones outsourcing their emissions to places like China. If we're serious about addressing climate change, we need to have an honest conversation about global solutions, not just virtue signaling. The audience erupted into applause, some even standing to cheer. Ethan's face flushed, his confidence visibly shaken. He was losing the upper hand, and the tension in the room was electric. The interview was no longer just a conversation, it was a battle. And Karoline was winning. Ethan, visibly flustered but unwilling to concede, leaned forward with a smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes. Well, Karoline, you certainly have a way of spinning things. But let's be honest, your party has a history of resisting progress. Isn't it time to admit that maybe, just maybe, the world has moved on without you? The jab was sharp, designed to provoke, to paint Karoline and her beliefs as relics of a bygone era. The audience held their breath, the tension in the room so thick it felt like the air itself was charged. Karoline didn't flinch, she tilted her head slightly, her expression calm but with a glint of something sharper. Ethan, she began, her voice steady but carrying a quiet intensity. Progress isn't about abandoning principles or rewriting history. It's about building on what works and learning from what doesn't. You talk about the world moving on, but I'd argue that some things, like freedom, responsibility, and the value of every human life, are timeless. They don't move on, they endure. Ethan opened his mouth to interrupt, but Karoline raised a hand just enough to silence him without being rude. And let me ask you this, she continued, her tone cutting through the room like a knife. If the world has truly moved on, why are so many people feeling lost? Why are they looking for meaning? For stability? For something to believe in? Maybe what they're looking for isn't progress. Maybe it's purpose. The room was silent for a heartbeat, the weight of her words sinking in. Then, as if on cue, the audience erupted into thunderous applause, some even rising to their feet. Karoline leaned back, her expression calm but triumphant. She had delivered the mic drop moment, and it was clear she had won the room. Ethan, visibly stunned, tried to recover with a weak chuckle. Well, I guess we'll have to agree to disagree, he said, his tone strained. But the damage was done. Karoline's words had cut through the noise, leaving an indelible mark. As the applause died down, Ethan forced a smile, his usual confidence replaced by a palpable unease. Well, Karoline, that was certainly spirited, he said, his tone light but his eyes betraying his frustration. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm sure our audience will be talking about this for a long time. Karoline smiled politely, her demeanor as composed as ever. Thank you, Ethan. It's been a pleasure. She stood, shaking his hand firmly before turning to the audience with a gracious nod. The crowd erupted into another round of applause, their energy electric as she made her way off the stage. Backstage, the atmosphere was a mix of awe and disbelief. Producers and crew members exchanged glances, some whispering furiously into headsets while others simply stared at the monitors, replaying the moment in their minds. Did that just happen? One producer muttered, shaking his head. She just destroyed him. Karoline, meanwhile, moved through the chaos with the same quiet confidence she had displayed on stage. A few staff members approached her, offering compliments and handshakes, but she accepted them graciously without lingering. She had said what she came to say, and now it was time to move on. As she exited the building, a small crowd had already gathered outside, reporters, fans, and curious onlookers eager to catch a glimpse of the woman who had just taken down one of the most formidable hosts on television. Karoline paused briefly, offering a warm smile and a wave before stepping into her waiting car. Inside the studio, Ethan sat at his desk, staring at his cue cards as the crew buzzed around him. His usual swagger was gone, replaced by a quiet introspection. He had gone into the interview expecting an easy target, but Karoline had proven to be anything but. As the lights dimmed and the audience filed out, one thing was clear: this wasn't just another interview. It was a moment, one that would be talked about for a long time to come. Within minutes of the interview ending, the internet exploded. Clips of Karoline's mic drop moments were already circulating on social media, accompanied by hashtags like #CarolineDestroysHost and #TruthMatters. Twitter was ablaze with reactions, from fans praising her poise to critics dissecting every word. Karoline Leavitt just schooled Ethan Carter on live TV. "Someone check on him, he might need an ice pack for that burn," one user tweeted, the post quickly racking up thousands of likes. Another wrote, "Finally, someone who doesn't back down from the media's gotcha questions. Karoline for president." YouTube compilations of the interview's most dramatic moments began popping up with titles like "Karoline Leavitt humiliates liberal host in epic clash" and "The interview that broke the internet." Comment sections were flooded with debates, memes, and even a few apologies from viewers who admitted they'd underestimated her. News outlets weren't far behind. Headlines like "Karoline Leavitt's unforgettable takedown of Ethan Carter and why this interview is a wake-up call for the media" dominated the 24-hour news cycle. Pundits on both sides of the political aisle weighed in, some praising Karoline's intelligence and composure, others defending Ethan's approach, though even his staunchest supporters struggled to spin the outcome in his favor. Ethan's reputation took a hit, with many calling out his bias and lack of professionalism. He went in thinking he could bully her, and she handed him his ego on a silver platter. One commentator said on a popular news panel, "This is why people don't trust the media anymore." Meanwhile, Karoline's team was fielding calls from reporters, talk shows, and even book publishers. Her calm, confident performance had struck a chord, and the world wanted more. But Karoline herself remained characteristically composed, letting her words speak for themselves. A few days after the interview, Karoline sat down for a brief press conference outside her office in Washington, D.C. The crowd of reporters was larger than usual, their cameras and microphones trained on her like lasers. She stepped up to the podium, her presence as calm and commanding as it had been on Ethan's show. "Thank you all for being here," she began, her voice steady and warm. "I know there's been a lot of discussion about my recent interview, and I want to take a moment to address it." She paused, her gaze sweeping the room. "That conversation wasn't about me, or Ethan, or even politics. It was about something much bigger, the importance of respectful dialogue and standing firm in your beliefs, even when the pressure is on." The room was silent, every reporter hanging on her words. We live in a world where it's easy to shout over each other, to dismiss ideas we don't agree with, or to twist words to fit a narrative. But that's not how we move forward. We move forward by listening, by engaging, and by staying true to who we are. That's what I tried to do in that interview. And I hope it sparked a conversation about how we can do better, as individuals, as a media, and as a country. She paused again, her tone soft. "I also want to thank everyone who reached out after the interview. Your messages of support mean the world to me. And they're a reminder that even in a divided world, there's still a hunger for honesty and authenticity." As she stepped away from the podium, the room erupted into applause. Reporters shouted questions, but Karoline simply smiled and waved, exiting with the same grace she had shown on stage. The moment was over, but its impact was just beginning. In the days and weeks that followed, the interview continued to resonate. It became a case study in media ethics, a rallying cry for those tired of partisan bickering, and a reminder that even in a world full of noise, the truth still matters. Karoline's words echoed far beyond the studio, sparking a broader conversation about the power of authenticity and the importance of standing firm in one's beliefs. As the final headlines faded and the social media frenzy quieted, one thing remained clear: Karoline Leavitt hadn't just won an interview, she had started a movement. And in a world hungry for truth, her voice was one that would not be silenced.